My husband secretly depleted our daughter's college fund to pay for his stepdaughters. I thought I knew what marriage meant. Trust, honesty, and putting our family first. My husband, Mark 48M, and I had been married for 17 years, and I believed we had built something solid. We each had a child from previous relationships when we got together, and then we had our daughter Emma together. I always thought we were a blended family that worked where all the children were treated equally. I was wrong in the most heartbreaking way possible. Mark's daughter, Sophia 25F, was always Daddy's little princess. I understood their special bond. She had been just 5 when her mother left them, and Mark had raised her primarily on his own before we met. My son Jack 2027M was 8 when Mark came into our lives. Jack's father remained somewhat involved, though inconsistently so. Mark took on a supportive stepfather role. Then there was our daughter together, Emma, now 16. I tried hard over the years to make sure all 3 children felt equally loved and supportive. We celebrated achievements equally, set the same expectations, and I thought provided the same financial support. Mark and I had set up college funds for all 3 kids, putting away money each month. We talked about how important it was that each child have the same opportunities. At least that's what I thought we had agreed on. Sophia was always ambitious and socially successful. She did well in school, was popular, and had that natural charisma that makes life look effortless. Jack was more introverted, intelligent, but quiet, finding his place in computer science. Emma, our youngest, took after Jack in personality, thoughtful, academically gifted, but shy. She struggled with social anxiety but excelled in her studies, particularly science and mathematics. I was proud of all 3 children for their different strengths. 2 years ago, Sophia got engaged to her boyfriend of 3 years, Tyler. He came from a wealthy family and had a successful career in finance. From the moment they announced their engagement, the wedding planning took on a life of its own. What started as talks of a meaningful, intimate ceremony quickly evolved into discussions of destination venues, designer dresses, and guest lists. Approaching 300 people, Mark was enthusiastic about every escalating wedding plan. When I expressed concern about the growing costs, he assured me they had saved for this and that Tyler's family was contributing significantly. I believed him. After all, financial transparency had always been part of our marriage. Or so I thought. Sophia's wedding last summer was undeniably beautiful. A weekend affair at historic estate with no expense spared. I was happy for her, though somewhat uncomfortable with the extravagance. Mark beamed throughout the entire event, proudly announcing to everyone that no daughter deserved a more perfect day. I remember thinking his joy seemed tinged with something like relief, but I dismissed it as the emotional culmination of watching his daughter marry. 3 months after the wedding, Emma, now a junior in high school, began talking more seriously about college plans. She had her heart set on pursuing biomedical engineering with dreams of researching treatments for autoimmune diseases, something she'd become passionate about after a close friend was diagnosed with lupus. Her grades were exceptional, and her teachers believed she had a strong chance at top-tier universities. One evening, Emma asked if we could review her college fund to better understand what schools might be financially feasible. It seemed like a responsible request from our pragmatic daughter, so I suggested we all sit down together that weekend to go through everything. Mark immediately became evasive, claiming he was too busy with work and that we could just give Emma a general idea instead of specific numbers. This wasn't like him, and his reaction raised immediate concerns. When I pressed him privately that night, asking why he seemed reluctant to discuss Emma's college fund, he became defensive. He deflected with comments about how expensive schools were becoming and how Emma would likely qualify for scholarships. Anyway, something felt wrong. So the next day while he was at work, I logged into our financial accounts, something I rarely did since Mark had always handled most of our finances with what I believed was complete transparency. What I discovered left me physically ill. Emma's college fund, which should have contained close to $120,000 after years of consistent contributions, had less than $8,000 remaining. Transfers had been systematically made over the past 2 years, with the largest withdrawals coinciding with deposits to our joint checking account shortly before major wedding expenses. I sat staring at the screen for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had there been a mistake, some technical error? But the transaction history was clear and methodical. Mark had been deliberately draining Emma's college fund to pay for Sophia's wedding. When Mark came home that evening, I was waiting at the kitchen table with the account statements printed out in front of me. He knew immediately from my expression that something was seriously wrong. When I slid the papers across to him, he didn't even look surprised, just resigned, as if he'd been expecting this conversation. Eventually, I can explain, he started, but his explanation was worse than the act itself. According to Mark, Sophia needed the perfect wedding because her social connections and appearance were her greatest assets in life. Emma, he claimed, would be fine with student loans because she was smart enough to get scholarships and would eventually make good money in her career. Then came the statement that broke my heart for my let's be honest. Emma isn't as pretty or socially adept as Sophia. She won't have as many opportunities in life based on those things. She'll have to rely on her brain, and that's why college is important. But she can get loans like most kids do. I was stunned into silence. This man who had helped raise Emma since birth, who had read her bedtime stories and cheered at her science fairs, was coldly categorizing her as less deserving of our financial support because she wasn't pretty enough to need a lavish wedding someday. He wasn't just betraying our financial agreement. He was betraying the very essence of parenthood, the unconditional love and support of your child. When I found my voice, I asked how he could possibly have made this decision without consulting me. His response was equally disturbing. I knew you'd overreact. You've always been too focused on treating the kids exactly the same when they clearly have different needs and potential. Sophia needed this wedding to secure her future with Tyler. Emma will be fine either way. In that moment, I realized that despite 17 years together, Mark and I had fundamentally different views of our children and our responsibilities to them. While I saw 3 young people equally deserving of our support as they built their futures, he saw a hierarchy of worth based on physical appearance and social standing. I spent that night in our guest room, unable to sleep beside him. By morning I had made a decision. This marriage could not continue. The breach of trust was too severe. But more importantly, I could not allow Emma to be raised by someone who valued her less than her stepsister based on such shallow criteria. When I told Mark I wanted a divorce, he seemed genuinely shocked. He accused me of overreacting to what he characterized as a practical financial decision. He insisted that he loved Emma but was just being realistic about her prospects compared to Sophia's. His inability to see how profoundly wrong his actions and reasoning were only confirmed I was making the right choice. The next challenge was telling Emma. I debated whether to shield her from the truth, but at 16 she was perceptive enough to know something serious had happened. I decided to be honest about the depletion of her college fund but carefully considered how much of Mark's reasoning to share. In the end, I told her that her father had used her college money for Sophia's wedding without consulting me and that this breach of trust, along with other issues, had led me to decide on divorce. Emma's reaction broke my heart all over again. Rather than expressing anger or self-pity, she immediately tried to minimize the situation. It's okay, Mom. I can get scholarships and we can figure it out. Don't divorce Dad because of me. Her immediate assumption that she should sacrifice her needs to maintain family harmony showed how deeply she had internalized being less of a priority. I assured her that the divorce wasn't because of her, but because her father and I had fundamentally different values about family. I promised her that I would do everything in my power to rebuild her college fund and support her dreams. I also made it clear that her worth was never, ever tied to her appearance or social skills, but to her character, intelligence, and heart, all areas where she excelled beyond measure.